Eleanor May Johnson's weathered finger froze above the iPad screen, her morning coffee growing cold as the impossible filled her kitchen with sound. The viral video showed a bear cub no bigger than a house cat unleashing a roar that shattered windows 3 counties over, saving its mother from a massive python's deadly grip. That wasn't just any bear, family. The coffee mug slipped from Eleanor's trembling hands, ceramic exploding across linoleum as 20 years of buried memories crashed back. She knew those distinctive markings, that creak, those ancient oaks. Harold had photographed this exact family the day before he died. The local news ticker scrolled beneath the video. Miracle bears missing. Suspected trafficking. Eleanor's 72-year-old heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. Not again. Not after what those monsters did to Harold. Her phone shrieked to life, Sarah Beth's desperate voice crackling through, "Grandma, please, I need to come stay with you. It's about Grandpa's bears." What had found them after all these years? And why now? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Eleanor May Johnson had been setting 3 coffee cups every morning for 20 years. One for Harold, gone since 2003, one for their son Michael, called twice this year, and one cold cup for herself that she'd reheat until noon. The routine kept her sane in the sprawling farmhouse that creaked with memories and medical bills that arrived like clockwork, $847.32 monthly, eating away at her Social Security like termites in old wood. At 72, Eleanor carried herself like someone who'd been holding her breath for 2 decades. Her silver hair, once Harold's pride, now hung limp around shoulders that had forgotten how to straighten. The kindergarten classroom voice that once commanded 35-year-olds had softened to whispers shared with African violets and the occasional telemarketer brave enough to call. "Harold used to say I talk to plants more than people," she murmured to the wilting geraniums on the windowsill. "Well, Harold, turns out plants don't abandon you when life gets complicated." Michael lived in Los Angeles now, a successful entertainment lawyer who sent birthday cards signed by his assistant. His calls came precisely twice yearly, her birthday and Christmas, filled with weather updates and vague promises to visit when things slow down. Eleanor had stopped mentioning the loneliness years ago. Children had their own lives. That's what good mothers told themselves. The farmhouse sat on 15 acres bordering the Great Smoky Mountains, where Harold had spent 30 years photographing wildlife before that terrible August night in 2003. Eleanor hadn't ventured past the property line since they found his empty tent and scattered equipment. The official report called it a hiking accident. Severe weather, poor visibility, probable fall from cliff face, body never recovered. Eleanor knew better. Harold had been tracking something those final weeks, returning from the mountains with worried eyes and whispered phone calls. His last journal entry, the only one she'd been brave enough to read, mentioned, "The poachers are getting bolder, and Honey's family is in danger." She'd assumed Honey was another photographer's wife. She'd never considered it might be something else entirely. 20 years of avoiding the dark room Harold had built in the barn. 20 years of leaving his camera equipment untouched, gathering dust like museum pieces from a life interrupted. 20 years of telling herself she was protecting his memory when she was really protecting her heart. The financial strain had worsened since her hip surgery last winter. The choice loomed larger each month. Keep the house Harold built with his own hands or surrender to Michael's gentle suggestions about nice assisted living communities with shuffleboard and supervised medication. Eleanor poured the untouched coffee down the drain and rinsed Harold's cup. Through the kitchen window, the mountain ridge where he'd disappeared stretched across the horizon like a sleeping giant. Somewhere in those peaks, Harold's spirit wandered among the bears he'd loved more than safety. She'd spent 20 years being the widow who stayed behind. She'd never imagined becoming the grandmother who might have to fight, The Greyhound bus wheezed to a stop outside Patterson's General Store, belching diesel smoke into the humid Tennessee morning. Eleanor watched through her kitchen window as a slight figure shouldered a battered backpack and stepped into the August heat. Sarah Beth Williams had grown 3 inches since Christmas, all legs and sharp elbows, with Harold's same stubborn chin and eyes too old for 16. Eleanor's heart clenched as she noticed the medical bracelet catching sunlight on Sarah's thin wrist, a detail that hadn't been there during their last video call. The girl walked with careful precision, like someone conserving energy for battles yet to come. "Grandma," Sarah's voice carried across the yard, bright as paint over rust. She dropped her pack and ran the final steps into Eleanor's arms, all pretense of teenage coolness abandoned. Eleanor breathed in her granddaughter's scent, strawberry shampoo, and something medicinal underneath, and felt 20 years of loneliness crack open like ice in spring. "Baby girl, you're nothing but bones," Eleanor murmured, holding Sarah at arm's length. "What aren't your parents telling me?" Sarah's smile flickered. "They're just busy with the divorce stuff. Dad thought I needed space to process everything." The practiced words rolled off her tongue like a rehearsed speech. "Can I see Grandpa's dark room? I brought my camera." Eleanor had avoided the barn for 2 decades, but Sarah's eager face dissolved her resistance. They walked hand in hand across the yard, past the vegetable garden Harold had planted, and Eleanor had maintained like a shrine. The barn door stuck, swollen with moisture and neglect, until Sarah threw her shoulder against it. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light streaming through cobwebbed windows. Harold's dark room occupied the back corner, a sanctuary of enlargers and chemical baths frozen in time. Sarah moved through the space like a pilgrim in a cathedral, touching equipment with reverent fingers. "Mom said Grandpa was the best wildlife photographer in Tennessee," Sarah whispered, lifting a lens cap from a Nikon that hadn't been touched in 20 years. "She said he could talk to animals." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Your grandfather saw things in nature that most people miss. He believed every creature had a story worth telling." She pulled a dust-covered box from beneath the development table. "These are his field journals. I never had the courage to read them all." Sarah opened the first journal, pages crackling with age. Harold's neat handwriting filled every line. Detailed observations of bear families, mating patterns, territorial behaviors. But it was the sketches that captured Sarah's attention, precise drawings of individual bears with names written underneath: Brutus, Mama Bell, the twins, and on page after page, Honey. "Grandma, look at this." Sarah's finger traced a sketch dated August 10, 2003. He drew the same bear for 5 straight years. Says here she had a distinctive white patch on her chest shaped like a heart. Sarah flipped through more pages. He was obsessed with her family. Eleanor leaned closer, reading over Sarah's shoulder. Harold's final entries grew increasingly agitated. Poachers spotted near Honey's den. Strange vehicles in restricted areas. Someone's been setting snares. The last entry, dated August 14, 2003, made Eleanor's blood run cold. "Meeting contact tomorrow about poacher ring. Honey's pregnant again. They can't take her babies. If something happens to me, protect Honey's family. They're special." "Grandma, your hands are shaking," Sarah said softly. Eleanor sank onto Harold's old stool, 20 years of suppressed grief threatening to overwhelm her. "He didn't die in a hiking accident, Sarah. Someone killed him." That evening they sat on the porch swing Harold had built, watching fireflies dance across the meadow. Sarah had spent the afternoon digitizing Harold's photos on her laptop, creating what she called Grandpa's Greatest Hits collection. Eleanor marveled at her granddaughter's technical skills, the way she enhanced old images with software Harold could never have imagined. "I want to find them," Sarah said suddenly. "Grandpa's bears. The ones from the viral video. I think it's the same family. Eleanor's protective instincts flared. Absolutely not. Those mountains are dangerous, especially now with traffickers involved. Grandpa died protecting them. Doesn't that mean something? Sarah's voice carried a weight that had nothing to do with her age. I've been reading about wildlife trafficking online. It's a billion-dollar industry. Bears with unusual characteristics can sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars to private collectors. How do you know so much about this? Sarah's pause lasted too long. School research project on endangered species. Another rehearsed answer, delivered with the same careful precision as her earlier explanation about the divorce. The next morning, Eleanor found Sarah sitting cross-legged in the dewy grass behind the house, camera focused on the tree line. "They come here sometimes," Sarah whispered without turning around. "I can hear them moving through the brush." Eleanor's pulse quickened. She hadn't seen bears on her property since Harold's death, but the signs were unmistakable. Trampled undergrowth, claw marks on oak trees, fresh scat near the creek that ran along her back boundary. "Sarah, come inside, now." "Grandma, look." Sarah's camera clicked rapidly as two shapes emerged from the forest. A large female bear, graying around the muzzle, led a smaller companion toward the creek. Even from 50 yards away, Eleanor could see the distinctive white heart-shaped patch on the mother's chest. "It's her," Eleanor breathed. "It's Honey." The younger bear, barely adult-sized, moved with unusual grace. When it reached the water's edge, it turned toward the house and made a sound Eleanor had never heard before, not quite a growl, not quite a call, but something that seemed to carry across the distance like recognition. Sarah lowered her camera. "They know we're here. They're not afraid." Eleanor watched Honey drink from the same creek where Harold had photographed her 20 years ago. The bear looked older, moving more slowly, but her eyes held the same intelligence Harold had captured in hundreds of images. When Honey lifted her head and looked directly at Eleanor, the connection was unmistakable. "She remembers him," Eleanor whispered. That's when they noticed the wire snare wrapped around the younger bear's front paw, cutting deep enough to draw blood with every step. The cub, for despite its size, it moved with youthful uncertainty, kept licking the wound, whimpering softly. Sarah stood abruptly. "We have to help." "Sarah, no. We call animal control. We don't—" "Grandpa wouldn't have called anyone. He would have helped." Sarah's voice carried a finality that reminded Eleanor painfully of Harold's own stubborn determination. "Besides, by the time officials get here, they'll be gone. That wire's going to get infected. The cub could lose its paw." Eleanor stared at her granddaughter, seeing Harold's compassion burning in young eyes that had already seen too much. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to go inside and let nature take its course. But Harold had never chosen the safe path, and somehow, despite 20 years of trying, Eleanor had raised a family that couldn't abandon those who needed help. "Get your grandfather's veterinary kit from the barn," Eleanor said quietly. "And Sarah? Stay behind me, always." Eleanor's hands trembled as she approached the injured bear cub, Harold's veterinary supplies weighing heavy in the canvas bag slung across her shoulder. 20 years of avoiding these mountains, these creatures, these memories, and now she was walking straight into the heart of everything she'd tried to forget. The young bear, Little Bear, as Sarah had started calling him, sat motionless beside the creek, dark eyes watching Eleanor's approach with an intelligence that made her skin prickle. The wire snare had cut deep, blood matting the dark fur around his paw. Honey positioned herself protectively nearby, but made no move to interfere as Eleanor knelt in the damp earth. "Easy, baby," Eleanor whispered, using the same tone that had calmed countless scraped knees in her kindergarten classroom. "Let me help you." Little Bear extended his injured paw with surprising trust. Eleanor's breath caught. This was exactly how Harold had described his first encounter with Honey's mother 30 years ago. The same willingness to accept human help, the same uncanny understanding that these particular humans meant no harm. Working quickly, Eleanor cleaned the wound and carefully cut away the cruel wire. Little Bear never flinched, never pulled away, just watched her face with those impossibly intelligent eyes. When she finished wrapping the paw in clean gauze, he made a soft sound that was almost a purr. "There you go, sweetheart," Eleanor murmured, gathering up the bloody supplies. "That should heal up just fine." Sarah captured everything through her camera lens, tears streaming down her face. "Grandma, this is incredible. He trusts you completely." That's when the expensive black SUV pulled into Eleanor's driveway. Dr. William Montgomery emerged from the vehicle like a man stepping onto a stage. Silver-haired, distinguished, wearing the kind of khaki field clothes that cost more than Eleanor's monthly grocery budget. His smile was professionally warm as he approached, but something about his eyes made Eleanor's protective instincts flare. "Mrs. Johnson, I'm Dr. Montgomery from the Tennessee Wildlife Conservation Foundation." He extended a manicured hand. "I heard about your encounter with our local bear family. I was hoping we could chat." Eleanor noticed how his gaze lingered on Little Bear, cataloging details with the precision of an appraiser. "What kind of chat?" "May I?" Dr. Montgomery gestured toward the bears, who had retreated slightly but remained visible. "Remarkable. In 30 years of wildlife work, I've never seen bears so comfortable with human presence. This could be a significant breakthrough for conservation efforts." Sarah stepped protectively closer to Eleanor. "What kind of breakthrough?" "Well, young lady, bears with this level of human tolerance could be invaluable for research and education programs." Dr. Montgomery's smile widened. "Imagine the possibilities. Live demonstrations, behavioral studies, genetic research. We could learn so much about human-animal communication." Eleanor felt ice forming in her stomach. These bears belong in the wild. Of course, but consider the greater good. A few bears in a controlled environment could help us save thousands of their wild cousins. Dr. Montgomery pulled out a tablet, swiping through official-looking documents. "The foundation has facilities in several states. Top-notch care, spacious enclosures, the finest veterinary attention." "No." The word came out harder than Eleanor intended. Dr. Montgomery's professional mask slipped slightly. "Mrs. Johnson, with respect, these are endangered animals engaging in highly unusual behavior. The state has protocols for situations like this." "The state can kiss my—" Eleanor caught herself, glancing at Sarah. "These bears have been living safely on this land for generations. They're not bothering anyone." "But they are bothering people, aren't they?" Dr. Montgomery's tone sharpened. "I've seen the viral videos. Social media attention brings crowds, and crowds bring danger. How long before some tourist gets hurt trying to recreate your granddaughter's photos?" Eleanor hadn't considered that possibility. Already she'd noticed more cars slowing as they passed her property, phones pressed against windows. "I could make this very easy for you," Dr. Montgomery continued, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a sympathetic whisper. "The foundation is prepared to offer substantial compensation, $500,000 for your property, enough to relocate anywhere you choose." "The bears would be safely relocated to our sanctuary and everyone wins," Sarah gasped. Eleanor's mind reeled. 500,000 would solve every financial problem she'd faced since Harold's death. No more medical bills, no more choosing between groceries and heating, no more lying awake wondering if she'd become a burden on Michael. "I need time to think," Eleanor said carefully. "Of course. But I should mention, time is a factor here." The Foundation has other opportunities competing for our resources. I'd hate for you to miss this chance." Dr. Montgomery handed her an expensive business card. "I'll need an answer by tomorrow evening. For everyone's safety, you understand." After he left, Eleanor and Sarah sat in stunned silence on the porch swing. The bears had melted back into the forest, but Eleanor could feel their presence in the lengthening shadows. "Grandma, you're not actually considering his offer, are you?" Eleanor studied her granddaughter's face, seeing Harold's determination blazing in young eyes. $500,000 is a lot of money, baby, more than this old place is worth. But Grandpa died protecting them, and maybe that's exactly why I should let them go. Maybe Harold would want me to choose financial security over what? Over doing what's right." Sarah's voice cracked. "Grandma, I've been researching Dr. Montgomery online. He's not what he seems." Eleanor felt her blood pressure spike. "What do you mean?" Sarah pulled out her phone, scrolling through search results. "The Tennessee Wildlife Conservation Foundation exists, but he's not listed on their staff directory. And look at this." She showed Eleanor a news article from Montana. "Last year, a doctor—" William Montgomery was investigated for illegal wildlife trafficking, but charges were dropped due to lack of evidence. "Sarah, that could be a different person." "Same photo, Grandma. Same face." Sarah's fingers flew across her phone screen. "There are similar reports from Colorado, Wyoming, and Oregon. Always the same pattern. Shows up after viral wildlife videos, offers to buy property. Animals disappear." Eleanor's hands began to shake. "Are you certain? Look at his license plate. It's registered in Nevada, not Tennessee. And his Foundation SUV? It's a rental from the Nashville airport." Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. "Grandma, I think Dr. Montgomery killed Grandpa." The accusation hung between them like a physical presence. Eleanor felt 20 years of carefully constructed denial crumbling. Harold's final journal entries. The missing camera equipment never found at his campsite. The convenient storm that supposedly made search and recovery impossible. "We have to call the police," Eleanor said, "and tell them that we suspect a respected conservationist based on internet searches and paranoia?" Sarah shook her head. "We need proof." That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She stood at her bedroom window watching for any sign of movement in the moonlit meadow. Around midnight, she saw them, Honey and Little Bear, drinking from the creek where Harold had first photographed them decades ago. The sight broke something loose in Eleanor's chest. 20 years of grief and rage and love tangled together until she couldn't tell where one emotion ended and another began. Harold had died protecting this family. She'd spent 2 decades honoring his memory by hiding from it. Dr. Montgomery was coming back tomorrow for her answer. $500,000 or the bears. Financial security or moral obligation. The safe choice or the right choice. Eleanor pressed her palm against the cool window glass and made her decision. Tomorrow she would discover just how much courage an old woman could find when everything she loved was threatened. Tomorrow she would learn whether Harold's widow had any fight left in her. Tomorrow the real battle would begin. But tonight she would sit with Harold's memory and ask his spirit for strength. Because win or lose, Eleanor May Johnson was done running from the life her husband had died trying to protect. Eleanor woke before dawn to the sound of Sarah retching in the bathroom down the hall. She found her granddaughter slumped on the cold tile floor, face pale as milk, that medical bracelet catching the harsh, fluorescent light like a warning beacon. "Baby, what's wrong?" "Just something I ate," Sarah whispered, but her hands shook as she gripped the toilet rim. "I'm fine, Grandma. Really." Eleanor wasn't buying it. The careful way Sarah moved, the bruises on her arms that looked suspiciously like needle marks, the pills she thought Eleanor hadn't noticed her taking, pieces of a puzzle Eleanor was terrified to solve. "Sarah Beth Williams, you tell me the truth right now. What's that bracelet for?" Sarah's composure cracked like ice under pressure. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she fumbled with the plastic band, revealing the medical information underneath. Sarah Beth Williams, acute lymphoblastic leukemia, emergency contact Michael Johnson. Eleanor's world tilted sideways. Cancer. Her baby granddaughter had cancer, and no one had told her. "How long?" Eleanor's voice came out as a whisper. 3 months since diagnosis. Started treatment 6 weeks ago." Sarah wiped her nose on her sleeve. "Mom and Dad didn't want you to worry. They said you had enough problems." "Enough problems?" Eleanor's protective fury exploded like a dam bursting. "You're my granddaughter. You're the most important thing in my life." "That's why they didn't tell you," Sarah said quietly. "They knew you'd drop everything and come to California, and they knew you couldn't afford to leave the farm." Eleanor sank to the bathroom floor beside Sarah, pulling her close. 20 years of careful emotional distance evaporated as she held her granddaughter and wept for all the time they'd already lost. "How bad is it?" "Caught it early. Doctors say I have an 80% chance if the treatment works." Sarah's voice carried a maturity no 16-year-old should possess. "That's why I came here, Grandma. I wanted to spend time with you and see Grandpa's work before things get harder." Eleanor understood now. The careful movements, the exhaustion, the desperate need to document Harold's legacy. Sarah wasn't just visiting. She was saying goodbye to the person she used to be. "Does your father know you told me? He's going to kill me. But I couldn't keep lying to you, especially not with everything happening with the bears." Sarah struggled to her feet, steadying herself against the sink. "Grandma, we can't let Dr. Montgomery take them. Grandpa died protecting them. If we give up now, his death meant nothing." Eleanor helped Sarah back to bed, her mind racing. A sick granddaughter, a property she couldn't afford to keep, bears that needed protection, and a man who might be a killer, demanding an answer by evening. At 8:30, her phone rang. Michael's voice crackled through the speaker, tight, with barely controlled panic. "Mom, please tell me Sarah didn't tell you about the leukemia." "She did. And you should be ashamed of yourself keeping this from me." "Mom, we were trying to protect you." "I don't need protecting, Michael. I need my family." Eleanor's voice rose to a shout. "That girl is skin and bones throwing up in my bathroom, and you thought I was too fragile to handle the truth? You don't understand the financial pressure we're under. The treatments cost $20,000 a month. Insurance covers some of it, but then you should have called me. I would have sold everything I own. To pay for what? You're barely surviving on Social Security. We couldn't ask you to sacrifice your home for medical bills." Eleanor stared out the kitchen window at the mountains where Harold had died. "This isn't a home without family in it, Michael. It's just a house." After the call ended, Eleanor sat in Harold's chair and tried to think clearly. "Doctor." Montgomery's offer would solve everyone's problems. Enough money to cover Sarah's treatment and Eleanor's remaining years. But it would also mean betraying everything Harold had believed in. She was still wrestling with the decision when Deputy Sheriff Emma Collins knocked on her door. "Mrs. Johnson, I'm sorry to bother you, but we've had reports of unusual activity on your property. Mind if I take a look around?" Eleanor led the young officer to the back porch, where they could see the creek where Honey and Little Bear had been drinking the night before. Deputy Collins examined the bear tracks in the mud, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "Ma'am, these are fresh. You've got a mother and cub using your property as a regular water source. That's potentially dangerous." "They're not aggressive. I've been watching them for days." "With respect, Mrs. Johnson, you can't predict wild animal behavior. One bad encounter and someone gets hurt." Deputy Collins pulled out her radio. I should call Fish and Wildlife Services. Wait. Eleanor's mind raced. What if there was a way to relocate them safely, without involving government agencies? Deputy Collins raised an eyebrow. What kind of way? Eleanor told her about Dr. Montgomery's offer, watching the officer's expression carefully. Something flickered in Deputy Collins' eyes, recognition maybe, or suspicion. Dr. Montgomery, you said, from the Tennessee Wildlife Conservation Foundation? You know him? I've heard the name. Mind if I run a quick background check? Deputy Collins returned to her patrol car and spent several minutes on her computer. When she came back, her demeanor had completely changed. Mrs. Johnson, I need you to be very careful around this man. There are flags in the system, multiple ongoing investigations in several states. Nothing proven, but patterns that concern law enforcement. Eleanor felt her last hope crumbling. What kind of patterns? High-value wildlife disappearing after he shows up. Always legal, always documented. But the animals never seem to make it to legitimate sanctuaries. Deputy Collins leaned closer. If Dr. Montgomery contacts you again, you call me immediately. Don't meet with him alone. After the deputy left, Eleanor found Sarah in Harold's darkroom, scanning more of his photographs into her laptop. The girl moved slowly, conserving energy, but her focus never wavered. Find anything interesting? Eleanor asked. Look at this. Sarah pointed to a photo dated August 14, 2003, the day before Harold died. The image showed 3 men in camouflage gear setting snares near a bear den. Their faces were partially obscured, but one figure stood out, a younger man with silver hair and distinctive features that looked remarkably like Dr. Montgomery. Grandma, I think Montgomery has been tracking this bear family for 20 years. I think he's the one who killed Grandpa. Eleanor studied the photograph, her heart hammering. Sarah, we need to call the police. With what evidence? A 20-year-old photo of someone who might be Montgomery? Sarah shook her head. Besides, if we involve the authorities now, they'll take the bears into state custody. Montgomery will just find a legal way to acquire them. Then what do you suggest? Sarah's eyes held a determination that reminded Eleanor painfully of Harold. We document everything. We get proof of what he's really doing, and we make sure the whole world sees it. That afternoon, Dr. Montgomery returned as promised. Eleanor watched from the kitchen window as his black SUV pulled into her driveway, noting the Nevada license plates Deputy Collins had mentioned. He stepped out wearing the same expensive field clothes, the same professional smile, but now Eleanor could see the predator lurking underneath. Sarah hid in Harold's dark room with her camera and laptop, streaming everything live to her social media accounts. Eleanor had insisted on this. If something happened to her, there would be witnesses. Mrs. Johnson, Dr. Montgomery greeted her warmly. I hope you've had time to consider my offer. I have some questions first. His smile flickered. Of course. Eleanor led him to the back porch, keeping the conversation in view of Sarah's camera. These bears you want to relocate. Where exactly would they go? Our primary facility is in Montana. Beautiful setting, hundreds of acres, very natural environment. Dr. Montgomery's answers came smoothly, rehearsed. The bears would have everything they need, proper nutrition, veterinary care, enrichment activities. And they'd be used for research? Educational programs primarily. Perhaps some behavioral studies, but nothing invasive. Our goal is conservation, Mrs. Johnson. These bears could help us save their entire species. Eleanor watched his face carefully. What about breeding programs? Something shifted in Dr. Montgomery's expression. A flash of irritation quickly controlled. That would depend on their genetic value. Some animals are more valuable for breeding than others. Valuable, interesting word choice. I meant scientifically valuable, of course. Dr. Montgomery checked his watch. Mrs. Johnson, I don't mean to pressure you, but I do need an answer. The Foundation has other opportunities requiring our attention. Eleanor made her decision. I'm sorry, Dr. Montgomery, but I can't sell my property. These bears belong in the wild. The professional mask slipped completely. Dr. Montgomery's face hardened, and Eleanor caught a glimpse of the man Harold had faced 20 years ago. Mrs. Johnson, I think you're making a serious mistake. These animals pose a public safety risk. If something happens, if someone gets hurt, you'll be liable for damages. Legal liability for a woman in your financial situation could be devastating. Is that a threat? It's a reality. Viral videos bring tourists. Tourists bring lawsuits. You can't afford that kind of exposure. Dr. Montgomery stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. I'm offering you a way out. A generous way out. I'd hate for you to regret passing it up. Eleanor felt 20 years of suppressed fury boiling to the surface. You know what I regret, Dr. Montgomery. I regret not asking more questions 20 years ago when my husband died in these mountains. I regret not demanding a more thorough investigation. I regret letting his killers walk free. Dr. Montgomery went very still. Your husband's death was ruled an accident. Convenient accidents happen a lot around you, don't they? Eleanor's voice rose. Animals disappear. People who protect them have accidents, but somehow you always walk away clean. Mrs. Johnson, you're obviously under a great deal of stress. Caring for a sick granddaughter, financial pressures. It's understandable that you might imagine conspiracies where none exist. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. How do you know about Sarah's illness? Dr. Montgomery's smile returned, cold as winter. Small communities talk, Mrs. Johnson. Word gets around about families facing medical crises. Expensive medical crises. The threat was unmistakable. Eleanor understood now. Dr. Montgomery had researched her family, knew about Sarah's leukemia, knew about Michael's financial struggles. He was using her granddaughter's illness as leverage. You have until sunset tomorrow, Dr. Montgomery continued. After that, I can't guarantee the bear's safety or your family's privacy. Medical records can be remarkably public when people start asking questions. After he left, Eleanor sat on the porch swing, shaking with rage and fear. Sarah emerged from the dark room, pale but triumphant. Did you get it all? Every word. And Grandma, I've been cross-referencing his background all afternoon. Dr. William Montgomery doesn't exist. The man who just threatened us is using a false identity. Eleanor looked at her granddaughter, 16 years old, fighting cancer, and still braver than anyone had a right to be. Sarah, what have we gotten ourselves into? The fight of our lives, Grandma. But we're not backing down. Grandpa didn't, and neither will we. As sunset approached, Eleanor watched the tree line for any sign of Honey and Little Bear. Somewhere in those mountains, Harold's spirit was waiting to see whether his family would choose safety or courage. Tomorrow, Eleanor would discover which choice she could live with. The storm that had been building all afternoon finally broke at sunset, unleashing torrents of rain that turned Eleanor's gravel driveway into a rushing stream. Lightning illuminated the mountains in stark, terrifying flashes as she and Sarah huddled in the farmhouse kitchen, watching Deputy Collins's patrol car disappear into the tempest. She believes us, Sarah said, wrapping Harold's old flannel shirt tighter around her thin shoulders. About Montgomery being fake, about the trafficking ring. She's going to contact the FBI field office in Nashville. Eleanor stared out at the storm, her 72-year-old heart hammering like a teenager's. 24 hours, she said. The FBI needs 24 hours to verify Montgomery's identity and get agents up here. We don't have 24 hours, Grandma. His deadline is sunset tomorrow. Through the rain-lashed window, Eleanor caught a glimpse of movement near the tree line. Honey and Little Bear had taken shelter under the massive oak where Harold used to set up his photography blind, the same tree where he'd photographed 3 generations of their family. Even in the storm, they stayed close to the property, as if they understood this place represented safety. "They trust us," Eleanor whispered, "just like they trusted Harold." "And look what happened to him," Sarah said quietly. The words hung between them like a physical weight. Eleanor had spent 20 years avoiding that truth, but there was no escaping it now. Harold had died protecting these bears, and she was walking the exact same path. Around midnight, the storm intensified. Eleanor was making her 3rd pot of coffee when headlights swept across the kitchen window, not from the driveway but from the back pasture where no vehicle should be able to reach. She peered through the rain-streaked glass and felt her blood freeze. 3 black SUVs had somehow made it across the creek and were positioned around her property like pieces on a chessboard. Men in dark clothing moved between the vehicles, setting up equipment she couldn't identify in the darkness. "Sarah, get away from the windows," Eleanor hissed. "Now!" They crept to Harold's study, where his old hunting rifle hung above the fireplace. Eleanor hadn't touched it since his death, but her hands remembered the weight of it, the way Harold had taught her to check the safety, to sight down the barrel. The bullets were still in his desk drawer, wrapped in oilcloth like precious artifacts. "Grandma, you can't shoot people," Sarah whispered. "I won't shoot anyone unless they try to hurt my family," Eleanor replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "But they don't need to know that." Her phone rang. The caller ID showed Dr. Montgomery's number. "Mrs. Johnson, I apologize for the late hour, but there's been a development. We have reports of armed poachers in your area, targeting the Bear family you've been protecting. My team is positioned around your property for everyone's safety." Eleanor felt a surge of fury at his audacity. "Your team? Private security contractors, fully licensed and bonded. We're prepared to defend the Bears from any threat." Montgomery's voice carried false concern. "However, our insurance requires that all civilian personnel be evacuated from the area. For your own safety, of course." "And if I refuse?" "Mrs. Johnson, these poachers are dangerous. Your husband learned that 20 years ago." The threat was unmistakable now. "I'd hate for history to repeat itself." Eleanor looked at Sarah, who was frantically typing on her laptop, streaming everything live to her social media accounts. Her granddaughter's face glowed with determination despite her illness, and Eleanor felt a surge of pride mixed with terror. "Dr. Montgomery, or whoever you really are, you have exactly 10 seconds to get off my property before I call the sheriff. I'm afraid the sheriff is dealing with storm-related emergencies tonight. Response time could be hours." Montgomery's voice hardened. "Mrs. Johnson, you have 2 choices. You can sign the property deed I'm sending with my associate, take your granddaughter somewhere safe, and collect your money. Or you can stay and face whatever consequences arise from harboring stolen wildlife." "Stolen wildlife? Those bears have lived here longer than you've been alive." "Not according to the federal wildlife trafficking statute. Any animal displaying unusual behaviors or characteristics falls under federal jurisdiction. I have the paperwork to prove ownership." Eleanor's hands shook with rage. "You forged documents." "I have legal authority to recover stolen federal assets. The question is whether you're going to interfere with a federal operation." The line went dead. Eleanor looked at Sarah, who was still typing furiously. "How many people are watching your stream?" 57,000 and climbing. The hashtag #SaveEleanor and the Bears is trending. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard. I've sent copies of everything to news stations, wildlife organizations, anti-trafficking groups. If they kill us, the whole world will know who did it." Eleanor felt a strange calm descending over her. Fear was still there, but underneath it was something she hadn't felt in 20 years. The absolute certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done. "Sarah, I want you to go upstairs to my bedroom closet. There's a loose floorboard behind my shoes. Harold hid an emergency kit there. Cash, important documents, his backup camera with photos they never found. If something happens to me, you take that kit and run." "I'm not leaving you, Grandma." "You have to. You have your whole life ahead of you, treatments to finish, dreams to chase." Eleanor gripped Sarah's thin shoulders. "I'm 72 years old. I've had my time, but you haven't had yours yet. Don't talk like that. We're both getting out of this." A knock at the front door interrupted them. Eleanor peered through the peephole and saw a man in tactical gear holding an official-looking folder. "Mrs. Johnson, I have documents requiring your signature, Federal Wildlife Recovery Operation." Eleanor opened the door just wide enough to speak through the chain lock. "Show me your badge." The man held up identification that looked convincing in the dim porch light. "Agent Stevens, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Ma'am, we have reports of illegally captive bears on your property. I need you to evacuate immediately while we conduct our recovery operation." "Those bears aren't captive. They're wild animals that choose to drink from my creek. Ma'am, our intelligence indicates these animals have been trained to display unusual vocalizations for commercial exploitation. That constitutes illegal wildlife trafficking." Agent Stevens consulted his folder. "We have authority to seize the animals and any evidence related to the trafficking operation." Eleanor almost laughed at the absurdity. "Evidence? You mean my dead husband's photography equipment?" "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to open this door and submit to questioning. Failure to cooperate with a federal investigation is a felony." Eleanor looked back at Sarah, who was holding up her laptop screen. The comments on her live stream were exploding, viewers posting phone numbers for real FBI field offices, wildlife officials debunking the federal recovery story, legal experts explaining that legitimate federal agents don't conduct operations during midnight storms without local law enforcement notification. "Agent Stevens," Eleanor said sweetly, "what's your badge number?" The man hesitated. "Ma'am, just open the door." "Because according to my granddaughter's research, there is no Agent Stevens currently assigned to the Tennessee Fish and Wildlife Office. In fact, the real federal agents are about 2 hours away, and they're very interested in meeting you." The fake agent's professional mask slipped. Eleanor saw him touch something at his ear, a communication device, and nod to someone she couldn't see. "Ma'am, you're interfering with a federal operation. Step away from the door." Eleanor backed away just as the man threw his shoulder against the door. The chain lock held, but barely. She heard more footsteps on the porch, saw flashlight beams sweeping through her windows. "Sarah, go! Now!" But Sarah didn't run upstairs. Instead, she grabbed Harold's rifle and positioned herself at the bottom of the stairs, the live stream still running on her laptop balanced on the banister. "I'm not leaving you, Grandma. We do this together." Eleanor felt tears mixing with her terror. Her granddaughter, 16 years old, fighting cancer and braver than any warrior in any story ever told. The front door splintered open. 3 men in tactical gear poured into Eleanor's living room, weapons drawn, but they stopped short when they saw the rifle in Sarah's hands and the laptop camera broadcasting everything to 60,000 viewers worldwide. "Federal agents!" the lead man shouted. "Drop your weapons!" "You're not federal agents," Sarah said calmly. "And the whole world is watching you break into my grandmother's house." Eleanor saw uncertainty flicker across their faces. Whatever they'd planned for this night, going viral in front of a global audience wasn't part of it. From outside came a sound that made everyone freeze, a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. Not Little Bear's supernatural call, but something deeper, more primal. Honey's voice, filled with 20 years of grief and rage calling for help, and the mountains answered. Through the broken door, Eleanor could see shapes moving in the darkness, dozens of shapes surrounding the house. Bears emerging from caves and dens throughout the region, drawn by Honey's distress call. More bears than Eleanor had ever seen in one place, moving with purpose toward the farmhouse where Harold Johnson had once promised to protect their families. The fake federal agents backed toward the door, suddenly realizing they were trapped between an armed grandmother, a live-streaming teenager, and an army of angry bears. "Doctor," Montgomery's voice crackled through their radio. "Abort! Repeat! Abort operation!" But it was too late for clean getaways. Sarah's live stream had reached 100,000 viewers. The hashtag was trending worldwide. And somewhere in the darkness, Little Bear was learning that sometimes the most powerful roar isn't the one that demands attention, it's the one that calls a community to action. The real battle was just beginning. The fake federal agents retreated from Eleanor's house into a nightmare they hadn't anticipated. Dozens of bears surrounded the property, mothers with cubs, solitary males, elderly females who remembered Harold's kindness from decades past. They formed a living wall between the traffickers and their escape routes, eyes reflecting the emergency floodlights like amber stars in the darkness. Sarah's live stream exploded past 150,000 viewers as people shared the incredible footage worldwide. Comments poured in from wildlife experts, law enforcement officials, and ordinary people horrified by what they were witnessing. The hashtag #SaveEleanor and the bears dominated social media platforms as the world watched a 72-year-old woman and her sick granddaughter face down armed criminals. "This is impossible," one of Montgomery's men whispered into his radio. "There have to be 30 bears out there." "They're not acting naturally." Eleanor gripped Harold's rifle tighter, watching through her shattered front door as Dr. Montgomery emerged from his command vehicle. His expensive field clothes were soaked from the storm, his silver hair plastered to his skull, but his eyes burned with 20 years of obsession. "Mrs. Johnson," he called across the yard, his voice carrying over the storm. "You're making this much harder than it needs to be." Sarah positioned her laptop so the camera captured everything. Montgomery's face clearly visible in the floodlights, his men with their weapons, the incredible gathering of bears surrounding them all. Her stream had become the most watched live video in the platform's history. "The whole world is watching now," Eleanor shouted back. "They know who you are. They know what you did to my husband." Montgomery laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Your husband was a naive fool who thought he could save the world one bear at a time. All he did was delay the inevitable. He saved Honey's family, he saved Little Bear's mother, and now they're saving us. Bears don't save people, Mrs. Johnson. Bears are resources to be managed, studied, monetized. Your husband never understood that." Montgomery pulled out a pistol, its barrel gleaming in the lights. "But you're going to understand it very clearly." The bears shifted restlessly, sensing the escalating danger. Honey moved closest to the house, positioning herself between Montgomery and the front door. Her massive form was silhouetted against the storm like something from an ancient legend, a mother's fury given physical form. Little Bear emerged from beside his mother, no longer the injured cub Eleanor had bandaged that morning. He stood tall, his white heart-shaped chest patch visible even in the darkness, and opened his mouth to release another of his earth-shaking roars. The sound hit Montgomery's men like a physical force. Several staggered, covering their ears. Vehicle alarms shrieked, windows in the house rattled, and from deep in the mountains, answering calls echoed back. more bears responding to the distress signal. "Enough!" Montgomery raised his pistol toward Little Bear. "I've been tracking this family for 20 years. I'm not leaving empty-handed." Eleanor stepped onto her front porch, rifle steady in her hands despite her age. "You want them, you go through me." "Grandma, no." Sarah tried to follow, but Eleanor pushed her back. "Stay inside, baby. Keep that camera running. The world needs to see this." Montgomery's finger tightened on the trigger. Eleanor saw her death in his eyes, the same cold calculation that had killed Harold 20 years ago. But before he could fire, chaos erupted. Deputy Sheriff Emma Collins' patrol car came screaming down the mountain road, emergency lights painting the scene in red and blue strobes. Behind her, a convoy of vehicles, state police, federal agents, local volunteers who had seen Sarah's stream and driven through the storm to help. "Drop your weapons!" Deputy Collins' voice boomed through her PA system. "You're surrounded!" Montgomery spun toward the arriving vehicles, his careful plan dissolving into panic. His men looked to him for orders, but the trap had closed around them. Bears on one side, law enforcement on the other, and the whole world watching through Sarah's camera. "Sir, we need to go. Now," one of his men urged. Montgomery's face twisted with rage. 20 years I've been hunting this family." He swung his pistol back toward Little Bear, but Eleanor was already moving. 72 years old, arthritic hands, bifocals sliding down her nose, but Harold's wife and Harold's widow, and some things were worth dying for. She stepped directly between Montgomery's gun and Little Bear, her own rifle forgotten, arms spread wide like she could shield the entire Bear family with her body. "You want to shoot someone? You shoot me, but you leave Harold's bears alone." Time stretched like taffy. Montgomery's finger on the trigger. Eleanor standing defiant in her house dress and bedroom slippers, Little Bear behind her making soft sounds like he was trying to comfort the old woman protecting him. Sarah's voice rang out from the doorway, clear and strong despite her illness. 193,000 people are watching, Mr. Montgomery. If you pull that trigger, the whole world will see you murder my grandmother." Montgomery looked at the camera, at the flashing lights of approaching police cars, at the bears surrounding him with ancient patience. His empire of stolen animals and forged documents was crumbling, his 20-year obsession ending in a Tennessee farmhouse with a sick teenager holding a laptop. He lowered the gun. FBI agents swarmed the property, taking Montgomery and his men into custody. Eleanor collapsed onto her porch steps, adrenaline finally leaving her system. Sarah ran to her side, laptop forgotten, wrapping thin arms around her grandmother's shoulders. "We did it, Grandma. We saved them." Eleanor looked across the yard where Honey and Little Bear stood watching the arrests. The storm was clearing, and the first pale light of dawn painted the mountains in soft gold. The bears began to disperse, melting back into the forest like spirits returning to their realm. But Honey remained, her intelligent eyes meeting Eleanor's across the distance. A moment of perfect understanding passed between them. Two mothers who had protected their families, two survivors of Harold's legacy. Then she too vanished into the woods, Little Bear beside her, free to live the wild life Harold had died defending. 3 days after Montgomery's arrest, Eleanor sat in the sterile waiting room of Vanderbilt Children's Hospital, watching Sarah's pale form through the ICU window. The adrenaline crash had hit her granddaughter hard, fever spiking to dangerous levels, white blood cell count plummeting, her fragile system overwhelmed by the stress of their confrontation with the traffickers. Michael paced the hallway like a caged animal, his expensive suit wrinkled from sleeping in hospital chairs. He'd driven straight through from Los Angeles the moment he heard about the live stream, arriving to find his mother branded a viral hero and his daughter fighting for her life. "This is your fault," he said quietly, exhaustion making his voice raw. "She should have been in treatment, not playing detective in the mountains." Eleanor's hands trembled as she folded and refolded the newspaper featuring their story on the front page. Grandmother and teen granddaughter expose international wildlife trafficking ring. The photo showed Eleanor standing on her porch with Harold's rifle, Sarah beside her with the laptop, both of them looking far braver than they'd felt. "She wanted to honor her grandfather's memory," Eleanor whispered. "Harold's dead, Mom. He's been dead for 20 years. You can't keep living in the past." "The past is all I had left until Sarah came home." Michael stopped pacing, his anger deflating into something that looked like grief. "She might not make it through this relapse. The doctors say the stress compromised her immune system. If she dies because of this bear crusade, she won't die." Eleanor's voice carried more conviction than she felt. "She's a Johnson. We don't give up." But privately, Eleanor wondered if Michael was right. Had her need to honor Harold's memory put Sarah in mortal danger? Was an old woman's quest for justice worth risking the life of the person she loved most in the world? Dr. Martinez, Sarah's oncologist, emerged from the ICU with the tired expression Eleanor had learned to dread. "Mrs. Johnson, Mr. Johnson, we need to talk." They gathered in a small consultation room that smelled of disinfectant and false hope. Dr. Martinez spread Sarah's latest test results across the table like cards in a losing hand. The stress Sarah endured triggered what we call tumor lysis syndrome. Her body is essentially fighting itself. The doctor's voice was professionally gentle. "We're doing everything we can, but the next 72 hours are critical." Michael's face crumpled. "What are her chances?" "Honestly, 50-50? Maybe less." Eleanor felt the room spinning around her. 50 years of teaching kindergarten, 20 years of widowhood, 72 years of life experience, and none of it had prepared her for the possibility of losing Sarah. That night, Eleanor sat alone beside Sarah's bed, listening to the rhythmic beeping of machines keeping her granddaughter alive. Sarah looked so small among the tubes and wires, her skin translucent as rice paper, her breathing shallow. "I'm sorry, baby," Eleanor whispered, taking Sarah's cold hand. "I should have protected you better. Should have sent you home when I realized how dangerous this was getting." Sarah's eyes fluttered open, unfocused but aware. "Grandma? I'm here, sweetheart. Did we save them? The bears?" Eleanor's throat tightened. Even now, even facing death, Sarah's first concern was for the animals they'd protected. "Yes, baby. Montgomery's in federal custody. The trafficking ring is shut down. Honey and Little Bear are safe." Sarah smiled weakly. "Grandpa would be proud. He'd be proud of you, braver than any grown person I know." "Not brave, just couldn't let them down." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "Grandma, if I don't make it, don't talk like that. If I don't make it, promise me you won't blame yourself. This was my choice, my fight." Sarah's grip on Eleanor's hand tightened with surprising strength. "And promise me you won't give up the farm. It's where Grandpa's spirit lives, where the bears come home." Eleanor couldn't speak, past the tears choking her throat. "Promise me, Grandma." "I promise." Sarah closed her eyes, a peaceful expression settling over her features. The monitors continued their electronic lullaby, the only sound in a room where hope hung by the thinnest of threads. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Deputy Collins arrived with a manila folder and news that should have felt like victory. "Mrs. Johnson, I thought you'd want to know. Montgomery's real name is William Brennan. He's wanted by Interpol for wildlife trafficking in 12 countries. The FBI found evidence linking him to at least 30 missing persons cases, including hunters and photographers who got too close to his operations." Eleanor looked up from Sarah's bedside. including Harold. We found Harold's camera equipment in Montgomery's storage facility, along with evidence from other victims. Deputy Collins' voice gentled. Mrs. Johnson, your husband's death is now officially classified as a homicide. Montgomery's been charged with first-degree murder. The vindication Eleanor had sought for 20 years felt hollow in the face of Sarah's crisis. Harold was still dead. Sarah was still dying. Justice couldn't resurrect the people she'd lost. There's something else, Deputy Collins continued. The viral video of your confrontation has generated over 50 million views worldwide. People have been sending donations for Sarah's medical expenses, for wildlife conservation, for your legal fees. The GoFundMe account is approaching $800,000. Eleanor stared at the deputy in shock. 800,000? People were inspired by your courage, Mrs. Johnson. They want to help. Michael appeared in the doorway, his face streaked with tears. For a moment, Eleanor feared the worst, that Sarah had taken a turn for the worse while she was distracted. But his expression held something she hadn't seen in 20 years. Hope. Mom, the doctors want to see us. Both of us. Together. Dr. Martinez met them in the hallway, her tired face transformed by something resembling a miracle. I can't explain it medically, but Sarah's numbers have turned around completely. Her white cell count is stabilizing, the fever's broken, and she's responding better than we dared hope. The doctor shook her head in wonder. Sometimes we see what we call fighting spirit, patients who survive against all odds because they have something to live for. Sarah keeps talking about her grandfather's bears, about promises she made. That kind of purpose can be incredibly powerful medicine. Eleanor felt her knees buckle with relief. Michael caught her arm, and for the first time since childhood, she let her son support her. Can we see her? She's awake and asking for both of you. They found Sarah sitting up in bed, color returning to her cheeks, her eyes bright with the fierce determination Eleanor recognized from Harold's old photographs. Grandma, Dad, I had the most incredible dream. I saw Grandpa, and he was standing with Honey and Little Bear beside the creek. He said to tell you that love doesn't end when people die. It just finds new ways to protect the things that matter. Eleanor and Michael looked at each other across their daughter's hospital bed. Two people who had spent 20 years growing apart, brought together by a 16-year-old girl's courage and a family of bears that had needed saving. Outside the hospital window, the Tennessee mountains stretched toward the horizon, wild and free, and full of creatures that Harold Johnson had loved enough to die for. His family was finally ready to live for them instead. 6 weeks later, on a crisp October morning that painted the Smoky Mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Eleanor stood in her kitchen making 4 cups of coffee for the first time in 20 years. Michael sat at Harold's old place at the breakfast table, reading Sarah's latest medical reports with the same intensity he once reserved for legal briefs. Sarah, her hair growing back in soft brown curls, sat cross-legged on the floor editing footage for the documentary that Netflix had commissioned about their story. The transformation felt surreal. After 2 decades of rattling around the farmhouse alone, Eleanor's home buzzed with the energy of 3 generations learning to be a family again. Michael had taken an indefinite leave of absence from his Los Angeles law firm, moving his practice to Nashville so he could be near Sarah during her ongoing treatment. The remission was holding strong, but the doctors wanted monthly checkups for the next year. "Grandma, look at this," Sarah called from her laptop setup in the living room. "The Nature Conservancy wants to designate our property as an official wildlife corridor. They're offering to pay all the maintenance costs and property taxes in perpetuity, but we get to keep living here." Eleanor carried coffee to her granddaughter, marveling at how different Sarah looked with hope in her eyes, instead of the careful resignation she'd worn during those first terrible days. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means Honey and Little Bear's family will always have safe passage through our land, and it means we'll never have to worry about losing the farm to financial problems. Sarah's fingers danced across the keyboard. Dad, you should see the legal paperwork they sent. It's like they're creating a nature preserve around our house. Michael looked up from his medical journals, glasses perched on his nose in a gesture that reminded Eleanor painfully of Harold. I've been reviewing the contracts. It's incredibly generous. They're essentially paying us to be caretakers of land we already love. The irony wasn't lost on Eleanor. Montgomery's scheme to steal their property had instead resulted in its permanent protection. The global attention from Sarah's live stream had brought conservation organizations, wildlife filmmakers, and researchers from around the world to their door. What had once been a financial burden was now the center of an international effort to protect the Appalachian bear population. A soft knock interrupted their morning routine. Through the kitchen window, Eleanor saw a familiar figure standing on the front porch. Not Montgomery this time, but Dr. Rebecca Torres from the University of Tennessee's Wildlife Research Center. "Mrs. Johnson, I hope I'm not intruding," Dr. Torres said when Eleanor opened the door. "I have some news about Honey and Little Bear that I thought you'd want to hear." They gathered on the newly repaired front porch where Harold's old rocking chairs offered a perfect view of the creek. Dr. Torres opened a tablet displaying trail camera footage from various locations throughout the mountains. "We've been monitoring the bear family's movements since the incident with Montgomery. What we're seeing is unprecedented in bear behavior research." She swiped through images showing Honey and Little Bear at different locations. They're not just surviving, they're thriving. Little Bear's unique vocalizations seem to have enhanced the communication network among the entire regional bear population. Sarah leaned forward eagerly. "What do you mean by communication network?" "Bears are typically solitary animals, but we're documenting cooperative behaviors we've never seen before. When one bear family finds a rich food source, they're sharing the information. When hunters or poachers enter the area, the bears coordinate to avoid them. It's like Little Bear's special ability has upgraded the entire population's survival instincts." Eleanor felt a chill of recognition. Harold wrote something similar in his journals. He said Honey's family was teaching the mountains to talk. Dr. Torres nodded. "Your husband was more prescient than he knew. We think Little Bear inherited an enhanced capacity for infrasonic communication, sound frequencies below human hearing that can travel for miles through forest terrain. It's not supernatural, just an evolutionary adaptation we're only beginning to understand." Michael, ever the lawyer, asked the practical question, "What does this mean for our family's involvement?" "The research potential is enormous, but we want to study them in their natural habitat, not in captivity. With your permission, we'd like to establish a permanent research station on your property. Non-invasive monitoring only, no capture, no interference with their natural behaviors." Eleanor looked at Sarah, who was practically vibrating with excitement. "What do you think, baby girl?" "Grandma, it's perfect. We get to protect them and help science understand them at the same time. It's exactly what Grandpa would have wanted." That afternoon, they walked together to Harold's memorial stone, which Michael had erected near the creek where the bear family liked to drink. Someone, Eleanor suspected it was Honey herself, had left a small pile of smooth river rocks arranged in a heart shape beside the granite marker. "Dad, I've been thinking about what happened 20 years ago," Michael said quietly. "I blamed you for a long time. Thought you were obsessed with Harold's memory instead of moving forward with your life." Eleanor touched the cool stone bearing her husband's name. "Maybe I was obsessed. Maybe I needed to be." "No, Mom. You were loyal." "There's a difference." Michael's voice cracked slightly. "Harold died protecting something he believed in, and you spent 20 years protecting his memory. That's not obsession, that's love." Sarah, who had been documenting everything with her ever-present camera, suddenly went very still. "Look," she whispered. Across the creek, partially hidden by autumn foliage, Honey emerged with Little Bear beside her. But they weren't alone. 3 other bears followed, 2 cubs and what appeared to be a young adult, probably Little Bear's siblings from previous years. The family group approached the memorial stone with remarkable fearlessness. Honey sniffed the granite marker, then looked directly at Eleanor with those intelligent dark eyes that had haunted Harold's photographs for decades. Little Bear stepped forward and placed one massive paw on Harold's stone. Then, in a gesture that made Eleanor's heart stop, he threw back his head and released one of his earth-shaking roars. Not a call of distress this time, but something that sounded remarkably like a song of gratitude. The sound echoed across the mountains, and from the distance came answering calls. Dozens of bears throughout the region responding to Little Bear's voice, creating a symphony that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. "They're saying goodbye to Grandpa," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face as she filmed the incredible scene. "They're thanking him." Eleanor felt Harold's presence so strongly in that moment that she almost turned around, expecting to see him standing behind her with his camera and his patient smile. Instead, she found Michael's hand on her shoulder and Sarah's arm around her waist. 3 generations of Johnsons finally united in understanding what Harold had died to protect. As the bears melted back into the forest, Eleanor made a decision that had been forming in her heart for weeks. "Sarah, when you finish your treatment and go to college, I want you to study wildlife biology, not because you have to, but because I think you'd be brilliant at it." "Grandma, college costs so much money. The documentary deal, the GoFundMe donations, the research station payments, we have enough to send you anywhere you want to go. Harvard, Yale, or right here at University of Tennessee if you want to stay close to the bears." Eleanor smiled through her tears. "Your grandfather left us more than memories, baby girl. He left us a purpose." Michael cleared his throat. "Actually, I've been thinking about a career change myself. Environmental law, representing conservation organizations, fighting wildlife trafficking cases." Turns out watching your family nearly get killed by animal smugglers gives a man some new perspectives on what's important. As they walked back to the house, Eleanor felt something she hadn't experienced in 20 years. Complete peace. Harold's death finally had meaning beyond grief. His family was whole again. His beloved bears were protected. And his granddaughter would carry his passion for wildlife into a future he couldn't see, but had somehow helped create. That evening, as autumn darkness settled over the mountains, Eleanor sat on the front porch with Sarah curled up beside her. Michael was inside, working on conservation law cases that had started arriving after news of his involvement in the Montgomery case spread through environmental circles. "Grandma, do you think Grandpa can see us now?" Eleanor looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the clear October sky. Somewhere in the forest, she could hear the soft sounds of bears settling in for the night. Honey's family and dozens of others, living free because a stubborn old woman and her brave granddaughter had refused to let the past die quietly. "I think your grandfather is everywhere the bears are safe, baby girl. And that means he's going to be with us for a very long time." Sarah fell asleep against Eleanor's shoulder as the mountain night wrapped around them like a blessing. For the first time in 20 years, Eleanor May Johnson wasn't afraid of tomorrow. She had her family, her purpose, and Harold's legacy living on in every bear track beside the creek, every roar that echoed through the mountains, every moment that proved love truly doesn't end when people die. It just finds new ways to protect the things that matter most. Dear friends, Eleanor's story reminds us that it's never too late to rediscover our purpose and reconnect with family. At 72, she could have chosen the safe path, selling her property, moving to assisted living, accepting that her best years were behind her. Instead, she found courage she didn't know she possessed when her granddaughter needed her most. How many of us have felt invisible, forgotten by our children, reduced to occasional phone calls and holiday visits? Eleanor's transformation from isolated widow to viral hero proves that our most meaningful chapters might still be unwritten. When Sarah arrived sick and scared, Eleanor didn't see burden. She saw opportunity to matter again. Their bond, forged through protecting Harold's beloved bears, healed 20 years of family fractures and created a legacy worth preserving. The financial struggles that once threatened Eleanor's independence became irrelevant when love and purpose took priority. This story isn't about bears. It's about the power of intergenerational connection, the healing that happens when we choose courage over comfort, and the truth that our families need our wisdom, strength, and love more than we realize. Sometimes the greatest adventures begin when we think our story is ending. What moment in your life made you feel most needed by your family? Have you ever discovered unexpected courage when protecting someone you love? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear how you found purpose and connection in your own golden years.